Hi, everyone. Today we're going to get into the institution of education and how that ties into our subtopic of gender. And in doing so, we'll be going through the Armstrong article, which ties into the 10th and final in class assignment. But before we get there, just a brief recap of what we did previously. So during our last class presentation, we looked at the institution of family and how that ties into the subtopic of race. So in the Dow article, we looked at how race connects to parenting, and we saw some of these themes earlier in the semester when we read the Leroux book. And nevertheless, basically what we wanted to capture in the Dow article is how our culture provides us different meanings we attach to racial categories. And we are exposed to and we learn those racialized meanings. And once we kind of know the stereotypes, they can influence how we operate family life. So, specifically looking at African American parents parenting sons, the article highlighted how the parents often being aware of the stereotypes attached to African American boys, how they kind of reorganize or maybe just adjust their parenting styles compared to if they're parenting a daughter or compared to if you're looking at a white parent bringing up a young boy. So again, we say that the parents are not endorsing, the parents don't believe the stereotypes of African American boys, but they do recognize that many people do use those stereotypes to understand African American males. And with this understanding, the parents try to manage the son's experiences, their environments, their image, and emotions. So that's what we looked at last time, connecting the family as an institution to our subtopic of race. Looking at our subtopic of the day, gender, and how it connects to the institution of education, we can say that education operates as a gendering institution in the sense that schools provide us spaces of production when it comes to producing gendered culture, whether it be in the classroom, on the playground. Individuals are exposed to understandings of the sexes, ideas of masculinity and femininity. And I say in the slide, we start to learn at very young ages, you know, in school, how boys and how girls are supposed to act, how the sexes are supposed to look according to our gender culture. So we have people kind of producing the gender culture within the institution of education. Thus, we can say that in the institution, again, whether it be the classroom or the playground or anywhere else, the school provides us spaces for gender socialization. Individuals are socialized to act and look according to the gender expectations. And sometimes the socialization process can be seen how teachers treat their students as boys and girls rather than simply as their students. But also we can recognize how a lot of the gender socialization going on is going on by one's fellow students. So your students kind of let you know if you're not, looking the way you're supposed to look or acting the way you're supposed to act according to you being a girl or a boy. And when it comes to this kind of gender socialization from your peers, often we call this peer policing, how they'll hold you accountable for kind of stepping outside gender boundaries, your fellow students. Turning our attention to the Armstrong reading for today, and this reading connects, like I mentioned before, to our final in-class assignment. What we're looking at is why on college campuses do we see kind of a higher rate compared to kind of off college campuses, a higher rate of sexual assaults. So the authors kind of look at different dynamics that go on at college campuses and how these different dynamics kind of all come together to create the perfect storm, so to speak, in terms of creating a higher likelihood of sexual assaults occurring on college campuses compared to off college campuses. And so, what we'll do is break down these different dynamics according to our course framework, looking at cultural dynamics, and then moving to some social psychological, and then institutional dynamics. So, starting off with the cultural dynamics, the authors talk about how we define the college experience, and not necessarily how we personally define it, but it's more about how our culture, our popular culture, defines the college experience, whether it be a movie that you see or how college is portrayed on television. Often what you see is kind of a one-dimensional understanding of the college experience, and how you define it, the meaning attached to college. It's about having fun, and it's about trying new things, having new experiences. And then we can get more specific. So, we can have fun in many different ways. For some people, having fun would be simply getting together, perhaps studying or something like that. But how fun in socializing is defined specifically is through partying, the use of drugs and alcohol. And that's how we really kind of define the college experience, kind of socializing with others. And these gatherings are party like gatherings where often people are using alcohol, using drugs. So, again, that's kind of the popular culture definition of the college experience. So, again, in movies or on TV, you kind of get this one version of college where people are always having fun, people are always partying. And although we kind of know that may not necessarily match our personal definitions, often we kind of believe that's what most people think college is about. And so research has shown for students who commute, students who don't use alcohol, they often say that I'm not really getting the full college experience because I'm not doing these things that you imagine that other people are doing. But often you got to overestimate the numbers of people actually kind of doing college through straight partying, socializing, so on and so on. So, nevertheless, that's kind of one dimension, one dynamic connected to our culture, how culture defines the college experience. And so then that ties into our social psychology when people will try to achieve this college experience. So, the saying goes, you only go to college once. You only get to experience college once. So I'm going to make the most out of it. And by that, you're not saying you're going to study hard and get the most education as you can. But often when people are saying, I'm going to get the most out of it, you're talking about that socializing part, meeting new people, going out, partying. And again, often the use of alcohol is involved in this socializing, going out, partying process. So again, the culture kind of provides you the directions of what college is supposed to be, how it's supposed to be experienced. And then once we kind of learn those directions, a lot of people will try to achieve that when they start to go to school. So there we see kind of the culture and the social psychology working together. And now we can highlight the institutional dynamics. So again, this last part of our class is looking at institutions. So we can look at how, as an institution, college provides people a lot more free time and a lot more flexibility with your schedules compared to your post-college lives. So, in other words, once you leave college and start to enter your career, start to work full time, perhaps settle down with a partner, perhaps have children, your time becomes less and less kind of the more you move on from college. You don't have that free time that you're kind of used to when you're going to college. And in addition, your schedule is often more flexible, within college. So, you can miss a day of class if you're sleeping in because you stayed out too late, and you're not going to get fired compared to if you stay out too late and you miss work. Perhaps you can have some more severe consequences for that. So again, this is another piece of the puzzle. When you're telling people that college is all about having fun and you want to go experience that having fun, and college allows you kind of the time and the flexibilities with your schedule to actually go and try to pursue staying out late and going out multiple nights a week compared to kind of a normal workaday schedule. You're not going to stay out that late. You're not going to be going out that many times per week. So that's kind of one institutional dynamic, how it provides you this time that's needed to have the fun, do the partying and the socializing. Another dynamic related to institutions would be how the admission process at colleges typically bring people together that come from similar backgrounds. And so if you compare Millersville students to Millersville students, more often than not, people are pretty similar in terms of a class background, the type of high schools they went to, their hometowns, and compared to like Franklin and Marshall, their students are more like one another, and they have some commonalities with Millersville students, but we could say that Franklin and Marshall students are more like other Franklin and Marshall students compared to Millersville students. Likewise, we'd say Millersville students are more like other Millersville students compared to Millersville student and a Franklin and Marshall student. So nevertheless, what you start to see on college campuses, people are more similar than different, and this creates a feeling of comfort, because the person kind of dresses like you, the person has similar interest in you. You maybe know somebody who knows somebody, so it kind of breeds this interest because you feel like you're similar to other people. So although you really don't know them, the feeling of similarity kind of breeds this sense of comfort, and sometimes a false sense of comfort. You maybe feel too comfortable because you really don't know these people. You really don't know what they're about. And sometimes, again, that can be setting you up a little bit of a recipe for potential trouble, for something you really didn't anticipate happening. And so, in addition to kind of bringing people together, similar ages, similar backgrounds, the kind of third institutional dynamic we can look at is how the college often will push students out of certain spaces and then push students into other spaces. And this is important because the spaces that students are being pushed into are spaces that people will be at higher risk of sexual assaults compared to alternative spaces. So, for example, students are not allowed to party or drink in your dorm compared to they are allowed to party and drink kind of off campus. And kind of the off campus housing, you're more likely to experience a sexual assault compared to if you're drinking or kind of hanging out with people in your dorm room. Now, we can recognize that yes, in dorms, sexual assaults do occur, but at lower rates compared to these other spaces, such as fraternities, such as house parties. And those are the spaces that people are getting pushed into. So you're getting pushed out of your dorm. You're getting kind of pushed out of a familiar place that your dorm floor, your dorm as a whole, your actual dorm room. And you're getting pushed out of bars. So again, things can happen at bars, but relatively speaking, in terms of sexual assaults, bars are much safer compared to somebody's private house or other places such as fraternities. But if you're under 21, you're not allowed to go to bars. So again, you're being kind of pushed out of that space. And this is important because sexual assaults occur more often for people under 21. So kind of the 18 to 19, 20 age group are at higher risk compared to people who are 21 and over. And a lot of this has to do with, now you're 21 and you're going to go out to bars, and again, they're a relatively safer place compared to other places. So another place that you're pushed out of, specifically women here, women who are part of a sorority are not allowed to throw parties. They're not allowed to kind of, drink within the sorority socially, compared to fraternities where you are allowed to have these social gatherings, where fraternities are allowed to use alcohol. So again, what you're doing is kind of pushing people out of relatively safer places, places that are familiar to them, their dorm, their sorority home. And as a result, you're getting pushed into places that, again, statistically speaking, are at a higher risk for sexual assaults, such as house parties and fraternity parties. And the house parties and fraternity parties are often unfamiliar places. So, you're not just simply going to a house party where you know the people. Sometimes you're going to a house party where you're going to the house for the first time. You perhaps don't even know the people throwing the party. So it's an unfamiliar space. And often those who are throwing the parties, not only the fraternities, but also the house parties, are men. So here you start to kind of wander into male dominated spaces where they're controlling kind of what's going on and how it's going on, and they control the space as a whole. And again, this is spaces in which higher likelihoods of sexual assaults will occur. So again, we're not trying to say that all guys who throw house parties or all fraternities are bad. But again, looking at the stats, relatively speaking, you are at a higher risk if you're a woman when you're going out to a house party compared to if you're staying in your own apartment, partying there, or if you're going out to a fraternity party compared to if you're going out to a bar to socialize and use alcohol. So that's how we start to see kind of all three dynamics starting to come together, creating that perfect storm, so to speak, and creating a higher likelihood of sexual assaults occurring on that college campus compared to outside of it. When we recognize the dynamics that go into kind of creating that higher likelihood of sexual assaults occurring on college campuses, then we can also recognize how we can change the dynamics to hopefully lower the rates, lower the chances of the assaults occurring. And so, can look at this in a couple ways. First, we could say the cultural dynamic we could change, and we could make the definition of the college experience more inclusive to other things that actually go on college campuses. So we're not trying to say that we should try to get rid of all the partying and alcohol use that goes on at college, but we can make the definition of that college experience more inclusive. We can start to talk about emphasizing, the studying more, emphasizing the new experiences more, the socializing more. That doesn't include the use of drugs, doesn't include the use of alcohol. So we could start to change that, and the idea would be if you change the culture and how we define college, then we could change kind of our social psychologies as well. So yes, we can still have fun, but we can focus on other elements of college, such as, the academics, such as kind of trying new experiences, meeting new people, but again, not necessarily the new experiences and meeting new people being mediated through the use of alcohol, through partying. And then we can also talk about when you are socializing, when you are partying, try to promote, safety and concern. So kind of make this part of one's culture, but you also make it part of one's social psychology where, when you are going out and about, when you are socializing and having fun, just make sure that students are kind of looking out for each other. And this is something that has gone on recently, and a lot of fraternities across various college campuses are kind of promoting this new social psychology, this new culture that we want to keep our campuses safe as possible, and the fraternity members often are kind of stepping up and taking the lead on this now. So you start to see a lot of those programs emerging and trying to create safety and concern when people are having fun, when people are socializing. So again, you would say kind of that new social psychology that you see being promoted will ultimately lead to lower rates of sexual assaults when people are kind of watching out for other people, when people are kind of more cognizant of this occurring and trying to make it stop rather than trying to simply ignore the situation, because when you ignore it, when you don't talk about it, nothing's going to change at all. And finally, we can look at some institutional changes. These are probably long shots, but again, if you're trying to change something, then you have to make change. And so, like changing the culture, like changing the social psychology, you could make an institutional change and allow alcohol use indoors. And you could allow alcohol use in parties in sororities, just as you do in fraternities. When I was an undergraduate, I lived, or my freshman year, my first year, I lived in a private dorm. And we were still on campus, but because we were private, the university didn't control us. And at our dorm, not under the same rules and regulations as the other university dorms, we actually were allowed to drink. We were allowed to party a lot more compared to the public university-run dorms. And that mattered because why a lot of people would try to go out and find a house party, we could simply just stay in our dorms because we weren't worried about getting caught drinking, or you weren't worried about having a party and again getting in trouble or perhaps thrown out of your dorm. So again, that does matter. And if you allow people to maybe have gatherings to certain degrees, use alcohol again to certain degrees, they'd be less likely to leave a familiar, relatively safer place and go to a fraternity party or house party perhaps where you don't know anybody, it's unfamiliar, and perhaps again it starts to set up this recipe for something bad to happen. So finally, we could talk about other institutional changes, such as lowering the entry age to going to a bar. Make it 18 rather than 21, or lowering the age of drinking as a whole. If you kind of know the history of alcohol use, age restrictions, it's something that is flexible and fluid. It's changed over time. Drinking ages, depending on kind of when and where you're looking at, have been 18, 19. So we think everything's kind of set in stone. It's always been that way. But bar entry ages varies. Like when I was in school again, a lot of the bars you could be 18 and actually go to. At some bars you had to be 21, but a lot of the bars you had to be 18. And Champaign, Illinois, where I grew up by, their bar entry age was 19. So again, it's something that you can do. And when my mom was younger, the drinking age, she told me it was 19 for them. And but a lot of people, when they grew up, our parents and grandparents, 18 was a number that was out there for the drinking age. So again, just because we're used to 21 being kind of that age restriction, it doesn't have to be that way, and it hasn't always been that way. So again, we kind of make these changes institutionally, social, psychologically, and culturally, and we're trying to change the things that contribute to the problem. So if you really want to fix the problem, or trying to lessen its, lessen the amount of the problem going on, because it's something you're probably never going to get rid of, but you can try to minimize it as much as possible. So if you want to do that, you actually have to change the things that promote it to begin with, changing the culture, changing the social psychology, and the institutional parts that all come together to promote the currents to begin with.